So the real question, once we accept that these things are changing and that there are going to be these increased energies that are coming to bear on our properties, what is it that we can do to become more resilient? And of course, resilient means the ability to either withstand or recover quickly from these difficult conditions. But really, it comes down to how can we best protect our families if these conditions continue to get stronger and stronger windstorms, more rain falling, potential for more forest fires, etc. Right? It's about protecting our families. So the new realities are more extreme weather events, heavy rain, violent thunderstorms, hotter seasons. The flood season is now year-round, even winter time where we have more precipitation falling on frozen ground. We have different water levels. There's more wind, which generates more wave action, more opportunities for nutrient loadings into our waters, which may impact our ability to drink the water from the bay if there's a toxic or nuisance algae bloom that ends up happening. Increasing storm water in combination with the sewage in our pipes in these old municipal wastewater treatment plants can also cause increased nutrient releases into our waters. And those, depending on where you are in the bay, can have direct impacts on your ability to use the water. The cottages that were designed years ago were not designed with these new intense wind loads in mind. However, they were designed very robustly, and we know as Georgian Bay cottagers and residents and people that use the bay that there are storms and there's lots of wind, and we've all seen the way Mother Nature can get mad and put on a real show. So they have been pretty resilient, but the considerations you have to make as you look forward are these new fluctuating water levels that you've never seen before, as we're experiencing now, are going to increase wear and tear on your properties and your infrastructure, docks and so on, and shorelines. There's much of what has been designed was not designed with these new environmental conditions in mind. Conditions are different and they are expected to continue to get more challenging. We're only at the beginning of these impacts right now. We will be expecting to see them continue. And we have summer temperatures that are expected to rise. So if you have people that you're trying to keep comfortable and safe, you may have to consider different ways of cooling. If your cottage is set up for passive cooling in the historic conditions, that might have been fine, but if temperatures are 2 or 3 degrees hotter than they have been historically, you may not be able to provide the same comfort with that passive cooling system. So all of these are considerations really that you need to keep in your mind as you look forward to making improvements to your properties or adding new features. And the one final point that I'll make is with these increasing energy events, so bigger storms or bigger forest fires or things like that, they're going to impact more people. So if one cottage gets its roof blown off, it's really easy for the local resources, the contractors and so on, to come to bear with the materials that are needed and the labor that's needed to fix that. But if 100 cottages have their roofs blown off, that would overwhelm the resources that would be available in order to respond to that particular event. And so designing your buildings, thinking about it, making them more resilient to these impacts so that you don't have to experience those catastrophic failures will be really important in your own planning going forward. Now, in some ways, it is about what you get used to. So if, for example, you live in the Bay of Fundy, you are used to tides coming in twice a day and raising the boats up 20 feet or 40 feet, depending where you are, and then going down again. And nobody's upset about that. There's no problems with it. The vessels don't, sink or fall into the water. Everybody's used to that, right? So really, it's just a matter of accepting what the changes are going to be and then figuring out how we can respond to them. And down in the southern parts of the US, we see boat lifts like this to lift vessels right out of the water. That's a normal sight down there, which you don't normally see up in Georgian Bay. But if there's higher wind speeds and more wave action, then somehow protecting your boat, you might need to use some out-of-the-box thinking for Georgian Bay. Resilience to flood and wind and increasing heat really just requires good design and good materials, siting, and construction. We are also in the process in Canada of updating all of the flood maps, so knowing where you are and knowing what your susceptibility is to flooding will be important. In fact, this is so important that it's in the mandate letter of the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. And he now is being instructed to work with the Ministers of Natural Resources for the provinces and territories to complete all of the flood maps in Canada, because these things have changed significantly. Design, good design. This happens to be a picture of a building from the Mississippi Delta area, but the entire living space is above 1.2 meters above the ground here. And that means that if there is flood conditions, that this family will be able to be sheltered in place. They will have the ability to survive and live in the building because none of their living spaces or furniture or devices will be flooded by the waters. So applying good design and site principles will be critical. And also using the available technologies. This is some pretty significant hurricane strapping to hold the foundation to the actual structure of the building to keep it from blowing off, as well as really some very significant ties to tie the roof joists to the wall structures down into the foundation and make sure that the roof doesn't get blown off in a tornado or in a hurricane. So applying existing technologies and making those retrofits to existing buildings is something over the next decade or so people should really start thinking about. There's also great opportunities to look at new technologies such as the net zero building standard, which allows the building to only consume as much energy as it actually produces on site. These technologies are already deployed. The Canadian government is looking at a certification for it. The City of Toronto is looking at this for new high towers that are being built. But there's homes like this over in Norway, similar cold climates to Canada, where there's not even a furnace in the building because the building design and materials are so efficient that all of the energy needed is simply passively brought into the building itself. So thinking way out of the box, but this is already a cottage that actually exists up in Georgian Bay. To deal with water fluctuations, water level fluctuations, this couple had a floating cottage designed. So this building floats entirely on the water with a gangplank over to the shore and a little cabin that they've got up on the shoreline as well. But that's kind of an out-of-the-box solution. Here's another example of that. This is a boathouse / cottage combination that's in the Muskokas. But there's people that are thinking about how to respond to changing water levels in a safe way. Resilience when it comes to fire is about, a house fire is about how to prevent that fire in the first place, how to escape that fire if it should happen and get the family out safely, and then how to rapidly respond. And so that usually means having access to some type of water pump that either the community has available through a call tree or that the individual cottage owners own and have access to. But when it comes to forest fire, it's a completely different thing that you need to think about. And that is, how do you escape the area? Not just your building, but how do you make sure you safely get out of the area, out to the highway, and then on the highway safely to a location far away from the forest fire, which means your building is going to be left alone to passively resist the fire. And so there's a few things that people might immediately think of, and that is that instead of having asphalt shingles on the roof of your building, put steel roofs on. But a steel roof by itself isn't enough. And here's an observation from a Key River cottager back in 2018 whose cottage burnt completely to the ground in that forest fire. Even though they had a steel roof, it was just laying flat on the rocks by the end of the fire. So it's not enough to do that, but there are some techniques that you can actually use, some suggestions. And one is to make sure that there's no eaves troughs, so there's no debris catchment that can ignite when the forest fire sparks are blowing all around. Make sure that there's spark arresters on your chimneys, not only to prevent your own fires from creating sparks and causing a forest fire, but also from the forest fire sparks getting sucked down the chimney and into your home if there happens to be a fire. Installing high-performance tempered glass windows, those will resist breaking. One of the main ways that fire gets into a cottage or a building and destroys it in the case of a forest fire is when the glass on the windows shatters and then the fire comes right into the home. And the second way, the most common way actually that fire burns down buildings is it enters the vented roof. So we have in our designs vented the roof space to make sure that the humidity and temperature stays low. But if the vents are not spark proof, then the forest fire embers can get right into those vents and into the attic spaces and ignite the building. So with some simple technologies, but some retrofitted technologies, you can actually take some steps to really protect your property when you're not there. And hopefully after the fire goes through and you come back, the building will still be standing. And there are some other suggestions that you see here as well. The last of which is managing vegetation around the homes. Fire marshals will say that buildings that survive fires are ones that don't have brush or bushes or trees overhanging the building. There is a side benefit to taking that vegetation away from around your home, and that is that as climate change impacts increase and the temperature warms up, we are seeing the northerly migration of various insect species, such as the deer ticks, which give us the Lyme's disease, but also this new tick that's coming in and been found in the Hamilton area called the Lone Star tick. When this tick bites you, you actually end up developing an allergy to red meat. So there are some benefits to getting rid of that vegetation as well. And there's also opportunities along our coastal properties here to actually take our hardened shorelines, our non-natural shorelines, and convert those into naturalized shorelines. This shoreline here is much more resilient to either high or low water levels than the hardened shoreline that was there previously. At times of low water levels, the wave action can actually undermine those hardened shoreline structures, those coastal protective works. And then when water levels are high, like now, they end up being overtopped, where this shoreline is much more resilient to different water levels and coastal wave action. And also the collateral benefit to this design is that you can also increase the amount of fish habitat along your shoreline, which of course helps the many other species that make use of our waterway. Finally, when you're looking at your cottage property, you also have to think about being able to have enough energy should there be some type of catastrophe or catastrophic weather event. And so nowadays, the addition of solar panels is becoming cheaper and cheaper for our cottages to look at. Batteries and solar panels can give you enough energy to survive these events, even if for a number of days there is no electricity restored to your cottage property. So that's some of the suggestions that we would suggest you actually start to think about over the coming decade or so. And as you make plans for the property or improvements on your property, you can start to incorporate these technologies into the solutions that you're using. Finally, for our community, we are spending time driving up every weekend to the cottage. So we should also be starting to mitigate some of the causes, the carbon emissions that we're doing into the atmosphere that are increasing these impacts of climate change. So we would like to suggest that people start considering looking at electric vehicles for those travels, zero emission vehicles or lower emission solutions that you can choose. There's many choices on the market. We will be putting on a seminar that we will announce about electric vehicles and provide an opportunity for our community to come in and test drive a number of electric vehicles at the Electric Vehicle Innovation Center. We've partnered with them on this, so we'll keep you up to date on what's going on there. Even this year, at the beginning of 2020, Q1, the electric vehicles were the most commonly sold small and mid-sized luxury vehicle, and the Tesla Model 3 was out in front there, but every manufacturer now is coming out with electric vehicle choices. And finally, because we're on the water, because we're in Georgian Bay, we also would like to start thinking about battery boats. Now, the Made of the Mist boats have announced that they will be converting to electric power, battery power. And also there are options. This was a boat that was displayed up at Desmazdon's Marina last summer. It's a fully electric small little boat, and very comfortable and quiet and a beautiful cruising experience for Georgian Bay. So the more people start asking about or talking about these things, the more manufacturers are going to start thinking about actually providing these opportunities for us to get rid of our gas engines and start using clean energy.